Thanks for checking out another episode of the Armed and Ready podcast. I am your host, Jason Wood, the VA loan guy. Today we have an awesome guest with us, Nick Popovich. He is a Silver Star recipient and a Marine Corps veteran. Come check it out. Welcome to the Armed and Ready podcast. I'm your host, Jason Wood, the VA loan guy. We thank you for stopping by again to see us. We have an awesome guest with us today, Marine Corps veteran Nick Popovich, and we're going to get into his story and his background, what he's up to today. So, Nick, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me aboard.
Yeah, man. So, you have a great story. You're pretty well known, Marine veteran, but we want to hear about your past. We want to know what you did and how you got to where you are today. So, tell us a little bit about your Marine Corps experience and what was your deciding factor to join the Marines. You know, what pushed you to get in the military, right? Not everyone does that.
I never even thought about joining the Marines. I wanted to be a scientist when I was in high school. I was kind of a nerdy guy, and in my college life didn't have the money to go to college. So a lot of times when people say the guys who joined for college money, I was one of those guys. And a Marine recruiter just happened to call me, and I didn't want to join the Marines. I just wanted kind of an easy road. And he said, well, just come hear what I have to say. So I did. I listened to what he had to say, and I thought, there's no way I can get through this. And he said one thing to me that I never forgot. He said, if you don't give up on us, we will never give up on you. And that impacted me more than anything else he could have said.
That's cool.
I raised my right hand, and I ended up going to college, but it was 20 years later after a career in the Marine Corps.
Right. And so you're in the Marine Corps, so you had a pretty badass job. I mean, you're in tanks.
Oh,
right?
I loved it. Loved that job. It was, I got it just out of sheer luck. I joined back when they had something they called a combat arms option. And so it was kind of an open contract, except for you were going to be some sort of trigger puller. And that's the one I got assigned to. I didn't really think much of it one way or the other until I got out in the Fleet Marine Force. And then when I got out there and I seen the tank commanders commanding those tanks, I thought they were just the coolest guys I'd ever seen. And I wanted to be one of them. And it's kind of what started my passion for it.
Yeah, I think tanks are cool. I mean, when I think of military, I think of like all the badass jobs, right? Like fighter pilot, tank commander, Navy SEAL, special forces, like that. I think, kind of Hollywood has, made those the cool jobs in the military, even though there's tons of really important jobs. But it's awesome that you got to like be in tanks. Like, so tell me about driving a tank, man. What's that like?
Well, that's what you start. The funny part is when people say, when they hear tanks, the first thing they say is driving a tank. And that's the first job you do. That's when you're brand new, fresh out of the tank school.
Okay.
So it's kind of the junior guy. But it is fun. When I did it, I was 18 years old. I was doing it on mainland Japan, was my first duty station. And I would climb into that driver's compartment. I just felt like this is just the best job I could ever have. I just thought it was amazing. And it is a lot of fun. I start out on an M60 tank, which is an old Vietnam era tank, and they're not very automotively impressive. They're slow. They're lumbering. They're very 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 rough ride. And then
good one to learn on, right?
Good one to learn on. Well, they're great because it takes all four limbs to drive. So you're shifting and driving and gas pedaling and braking and steering. So it was a lot of fun. And very challenging. And then we went to the new one, the M1A1, which is, it is literally like going from a skateboard to a Cadillac. I mean, it is very automotively impressive. It can jump, it does, it really gets up and goes. It goes faster than you ever want to go in a 68-ton piece of gear. It's very fast.
How's braking when you're going fast in one of those?
Oh, it can stop on a dime too.
Really?
You can throw the tank commander and the loader out of the turret. I mean, it will stop that fast.
Oh wow!
It's automotively amazing. It can go up a 60-degree grade and it'll upshift.
So when you're driving, do you have any visibility out of the tank, really?
You do, and mostly the tank commander will assist the driver. The driver will do most of the driving, but when you get in tight places or things that he may not be able to see, because he's looking from not much higher than you're sitting off the ground right now, right. Whereas the tank commander is 10 feet up in the air. He can see things that the driver can't, and so you'll assist through the intercom. But the driver, you really can't see very well when we work in really close with like infantry and stuff like that. A lot of times I'll brief them beforehand. We're really not as in control of this thing as you may think. So give it a little bit of room. You know what I mean?
You have any funny stories from driving the tank?
Just with the new one, with the M1A1, it is so automotively advanced. It just really goes fast. And it was just a training op. We're out there in 29 Palms, and we're driving along. I let the rest of Calm get way out ahead of us, and I had a really good driver, this kid named Perez, and he's going. And there's this perfect storm of things that can happen because the suspension is very, very advanced. But if you have like a dip bump, dip bump, dip bump, it'll compress it, expand it, compress it, expand it, compress it, and then launch it. It's just like the perfect combination. And it'll take those 68 tons and throw them up in the air about 6 feet off the ground. And so we're heading for it. We're going about 40 miles an hour, which is insanely fast in 68 tons. And I can see that dip, bump, dip, bump, dip thing up ahead. The loader looks at me. This is the other guy named Govia, and he's like, you can tell him to slow down, right? I said, no. And I just let him go, and then did just like it's supposed to. And on that third one, it flew up in the air. Our boxes flew open. All our tools were like we were like the zero gravity moment where everything was flying in the air. The tools had flown out the bags. They were all over the place. And we landed, and we had to stop and go pick up all our stuff and everything. And we pulled into our defensive position for later that night. And one of the armor decks that protects the engine compartment, we'd actually knocked it off the mounts, and it was sitting sideways on the back of the tank. So they can be a lot of fun, just a lot of fun.
That sounds awesome. So you drive the tank for a while, kind of move up, and you ended up being a tank commander, right?
I ended up commanding my first tank before I was 21. I was 20 years old when I got my first tank command, and I was very blessed to have just been in the right place for these sort of circumstances to come together, and been commanding them ever since. And there's no better job I can think of. I loved it every minute I did it. I ended up getting wounded roughly about 20 years after that. And then, I had to move on and move out of the civilian world. Tank commanders, you got to identify targets 2,000 meters away.
Right.
And I'd have trouble doing it 20 meters away with my current eyesight. So I had to find a new line of work, and that's just the way it goes. I love the Marine Corps. I love that we're the tough team. And if you can't locate, close with, and destroy the enemy, then it's time for you to move on to other pastures.
Right. So tell us about that transition. So you got in the military, so you got awarded your Silver Star recipient.
Yes, sir.
And Purple Heart also.
Yes.
Right?
That's the one you don't want.
That's the one you don't want, right?
One of the guys, I was at some dinner one time, and he said, yeah, we're all the guys who stood up and said what when somebody said duck. I said that was a clever way to refer to the Purple Heart.
That is clever, yeah. The Silver Star is no joke. That's a big accomplishment. That's awesome.
I'm very proud of that.
Yeah, that's a really big award in the military. So you got done with the military, and 20 years, made it to gunnery sergeant.
Gunnery sergeant.
That's awesome. And in the Marine Corps, that's a big role. That's a big leadership role.
I love being a gunnery sergeant. In the Marine Corps, we push a lot of leadership, like from corporal. And I was commanding tanks from when I was a corporal. So so you get a lot of responsibility from a very young age. But as a gunny, there's a little bit of prestige about it. When they have the stereotypical Marine leader in the movies, they always make him a gunny. So there's kind of a little bit of pride with that. And I was very proud to be a gunnery sergeant. Absolutely.
That's awesome. So so when you got out, what happened next? Did you go straight into school, or what did you end up doing?
I went into college. On my way out the door to Marine Corps, I really had a physically difficult time with the transition because I couldn't read or write. My vision had been messed up to the point that what the heck are you going to do if you can't read or write? And I'm trying to figure out what the heck am I going to do? And I'm trying to crunch numbers because I still had, I have 2 sons, and I'm trying to crunch numbers. Can we pay our bills, outside the Marine Corps? And I'm figuring, well, at the very minimum, I have a strong back. I can dig ditches. I can do general labor. And then they had a VA program I went to, and it was an inpatient program at the VA hospital for blind rehabilitation, to take the sight you have and learn how to use it. And that was life-changing for me. And when I went in there, the first guy who dealt, his last name was Wood as well, by the way.
Oh, the great name.
Dr. Wood. And he talked to me and he said, well, what do you want to do with the rest of your life? And I thought about what I had thought about before I got wounded. And I thought, well, I'd been a drill instructor. I was a platoon sergeant most of the end of my Marine Corps career, and you do a lot of instructing. And I'd always kind of thought about becoming a school teacher after the Marine Corps.
Okay.
And I told him, and I felt silly telling him that. I said, well, I've been a drill instructor. I figured I'd teach high school. I'll get him a few years earlier, and I figured it'd be really rewarding. And he said, well, what's your degree in? I said, well, I got nothing, PhD, public high school diploma. I got nothing, you know. And by the way, I can't read or write right now. And they said, no problem. And they went to work with me and they taught me how to read, you know, sentences and turn those sentences into paragraphs, turn paragraphs into books. And now instead of like out doing PT, I'm doing reading therapy every day. And the instructors are working with me, and now we're timing how fast I can read. First computer I ever turned on in my life was in a VA hospital. They taught me how to become computer literate, how to type, you know, skills awesome. I would need to be successful as a student.
Right.
And it was very life-changing for me. And after a few months there, the instructor, he would time me every day, and he came out there and he says, all right, Nick, he says, you're at 140 words per minute. That's college level reading speed. You're ready to go. So I packed my sea bag, got ready to head off to San Diego State University. And he says, well, came back to that a little bit later. He said, I may have misspoke. He says 140 words per minute. It's actually about a 6th grade reading speed. Oh. But we figured you'd do all right anyway. And sure enough, you know, the military skill set you have makes you very good at being a student, because you're very, you know, organized. You're very disciplined on accomplishing assignments. You're very structured in how you approach things. You always look at things in terms of the base of the pyramid. So whatever subject I was in, I would figure out what is my base of knowledge I need to know, and then seek out those answers. And plus, being about twice as old as the student to my left or my right, was kind of fun, because it was motivating in a way, because there was a veteran organization on San Diego State, and I used to, you know, I would be involved with them somewhat.
Right.
And they would, you know, I'd hear like the younger veterans, the guys like the first termers who got out, and they'd say, oh, you got these kids now, they don't even know there's a war going on, and look at them walking around just smiling every day, and they'd be mad at them. And I'd say, well, that's what you serve for, you know. I'm happy that war is a million miles away as far as they're concerned. Yeah. And that's why I served, was it so they can go there with a smile on their face and not have to worry about that sort of stuff, unless they choose to raise their right hand and go do that. So I really enjoyed the campus environment. I would never, I had like a policy. I would never argue with the other students, because they're young, they're figuring it out. And I would feel kind of like a bully. Yeah. You know, and but the instructors were always fair game. You know, the professors, that was fair game. And then so I felt that led to a really, really good education, because I was old enough to have been around the block a little bit, to have known when what they were saying just didn't quite jive with the world I seen every day. And then the fact that I was a history major really led for a lot of interesting
I bet a lot of interesting conversations.
A lot of interesting conversations.
Yeah, that's got to be interesting, because I mean you just lived it, right? So I skipped over something I wanted to ask you about, but that's kind of a good segue. Is you know, part of the history that you participated in, right, that's in the history books now, is the war in Iraq. Mm-hmm. Right, and so you were part of the invasion and toppling the Saddam statue and all that stuff. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, that was, and I'll approach it actually I'll tie it all together to school, because the pictures from there, my last semester, I was just ready to get out and go start teaching and just kind of be done with this. So it was a class I participated very little in. It was called American Foreign Relations Since World War I. And the textbook, there was a picture of me in the textbook at that Saddam statue thing.
No kidding.
And I never told anybody. I never participated very little. And one of my fellow students, he said his professor's name was Weeks. He said, Professor Weeks, he says, you know, Nick's in that textbook right there. And he told on me. So Professor Weeks said, well, Nick, now you have to participate. What do you think? And the class was very anti-American, I guess, for lack of a better way to describe it. Mm. And so what I did was I spoke, and I said, you know, I see totalitarian regimes such as the one that was in Iraq before we went there, socialism, communism, all these things as slavery, a form of slavery. And I said, if I'm a part of a country that's willing to stand up and help somebody fight for their freedom, yeah, I'm happy to do that. I'm glad we did that. I'm proud to be part of a nation that does that sort of thing. That was about a 5-minute version of what I just said, you know, longer version. Right. And perhaps quite a bit more eloquent, I hope. And he said, okay, and that seemed to make sense to him. And after that class, and it was like the second to last class of my entire college life, these kids, there were like 30 of them 30 students in the class. 30 of them were waiting outside the classroom when that session ended. And I walked out, and because there was a lot of anti-American stuff thrown around in that class. And one of the loudest,
college campuses,
and it's their right to do. And one of the most vocal students walked up to me. And he had a whole line of them behind him. And he said, Nick, I want to apologize to you for everything bad I said about the nation in this class. And I was so shocked that was their reaction to what I had just said.
Wow. That's pretty big of them.
Yeah, it was really nice. And I'll never forget it. I thought it was one of the most moving things that happened when I was in school. And so to kind of bring that back to where it was, the toppling of the Saddam statue, when we got to Baghdad, and watching those citizens rise up, those Iraqi citizens, because we really didn't know much about them. I fought against their military in the original Gulf War. I fought against their military on this one on the march up to Baghdad. But the citizens, once you got to know them, the Iraqi people are fantastic. They're amazing people. They're strong. They're very funny. They're very upbeat. They're very motivated. They remind me a lot of like my fellow Marines. My fellow Marines were the sort of people, no matter how bad the situation is, they're always laughing about it. They're always smiling. They're always doing that positive mental attitude thing. And the Iraqi people are very similar because you got
an oppressive life. So I mean that's good. They've
had a very oppressive life,
right?
And and then they've got a foreign military rolling over their country, and yet they would always be any interaction I had with them. They were always very positive. They would always laugh, and I loved them for that. And seeing them rise up and tear that statue down, because all we did was help them. They just asked for help, and we went over and helped them. And watching that, and when I watched those people celebrate, when that thing came down, because to them, these images of Saddam were everywhere, and they were a reminder: you don't speak out, or secret police come and pull your family away and do God knows what to them, or we murder you in the middle of the night. I mean, that regime was horrible.
Yeah.
And when I watched them celebrate in downtown Baghdad, I mean, I realized what I was looking at. I was looking at freedom. I was looking at liberty at its just most grassroots level, because ours had been paid for 244 years ago.
Right.
To them, this is their first taste of it, and I was so proud. I was so proud of my nation that this is the sort of thing we did. I was so proud to just be part of it. We all like to think that what we do makes a difference, but there was one time when you really seen it, like what you're doing is actually making the world a better place. Directly.
Yeah.
And I was so proud to be part of it.
That's really cool. And I think it's interesting how you mentioned, the toppling of that statue was something they wanted.
Yes.
You guys helped them, right? I mean, you had the physical means to help pull it down, right? But
we had just set it in a defense, and the statues happened to be in the middle of they call it Ferdo Square, but it's actually a circle, and the statue's in the middle of the circle. And we just set a defense around it, oriented outboard. We're just waiting for our next op order. And they started, because we were there and because we had surrounded, it took on a symbolism to them.
Yeah.
And because we'd surrounded, because you couldn't disrespect Saddam Hussein, not even an image of him. And now because we were there, they started disrespect. They started throwing their shoes at it, which in their culture is a very disrespectful thing to do. Then they started beating on the pedestal with a sledgehammer. The pedestal's as wide as this room. They're never going to beat that.
They're not going to do much with a hammer, yeah.
So then a kid walked up to one of our vehicles and said, Mister, can you help us tear down the statue? And then that was when we went over and helped them out.
That's cool. Yeah, I think that part of the story, especially in the media, has been missing.
Sure.
and I like hearing that part of it, because I don't know, I feel defensive about our military and a lot of the stuff that's happening in current news day, that it kind of gets skewed a little bit as
Absolutely.
to the why behind some of this stuff that happens, and you got to live it and we're right there on the street with
Very
it.
blessed.
Yeah, so that's really cool. Well, yeah, I commend you for that. That's just such a cool experience to have happen.
We're very blessed.
Yeah.
Very lucky to have been there. And we had because you're part of obviously bigger entities. I'm part of at that time, part of a tank company, part of a battalion-sized task force, part of a regiment. So the guys who weren't on those couple blocks that got to be part of that, they always kind of gave us a hard time. Like, man, we were like 2 blocks away and we missed it.
Right.
I'm just very blessed that was where I happened to end up.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't control it. So, okay, back to you're wrapping up school. You got done at San Diego State, and history. Did you go into teaching then? After?
I did. I went in. I taught history for a little while. I taught history here in the state of California, I I heard this from a lawyer and I kind of stole it. So this isn't my original expression, but I think nothing sums it up better than this. Is in California history, 2 + 2 is anything greater than 3 and less than 5. It's very ambiguous, and I really didn't like that very much. So I applied for a position in Teach for America, and I wanted to teach math. I wanted to teach algebra, and luckily they accepted me, and luckily I passed the exams because I ended up teaching in the state of Arkansas in the Mississippi River Delta, in a very poor school district, and you just had to pass certain exams, and I didn't. I loved math, but I wasn't a math major or minor, nothing in college. So I had to pass these exams. So I went to the Veterans House on San Diego State University, and I said, "Is there anybody you got a math tutor in here? Anybody can tutor me in math?" Fellow walks out. I introduced myself. I said, "I'm Nick Popovich." He says, "I know who you are, Gunny." And I thought, okay, because I'd done a couple of things local, maybe our pass and cross. And I said, where do we know each other from? And he said, "I'm a Fox Company recruit." He was one of the recruits from when I was a drill instructor.
No way.
And I said, cool. "This is going to be a dream come true for you. You're going to be able to yell at me. You can go nuts just as long as I pass that test." And he got me through the test. He was a great instructor.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's really awesome.
And so I taught algebra, and now in algebra, 2 + 2 is 4. And algebra was such a unique thing, and I loved it. And I would try and teach it to the students in this manner. I would always base everything on the equation. And see, the equation is a statement of fact. This is the same as this, and that there's no changing that. There's no cultural bias to that. There's no two ways about it. This is the same as this. These are equal. So whatever you do to then I would do it in terms of a seesaw and various ways to contextualize it.
Yeah.
And but I will kind of close that chapter a little bit. That teaching in the Department of Education was not the experience I had expected it to be. I thought of my various teachers I'd had coming up through school and how influential they were to me and how much I had learned from them. Mr. Hyam from my middle school, he was my algebra teacher when I was in 8th grade, and he was such a great guy. He was just a great instructor, and he was such a blue collar guy. He just had a blue collar way of teaching academics that I always reacted to. My father was a factory worker, so somehow Mr. Hyam always talked on my level. He used to joke because he used to talk about how poor teachers were all the time. He was so funny with that. He'd come in with his sack lunch and he'd say, "Bologna sandwich, working man steak," he used to call it. I've kind of stolen that expression and used it for the rest of my life. But the Department of Education is a lot less direct instruction now. It's a lot more what they call student-based learning, discovery learning, things like that. And I kind of ideologically disagreed with that. I think the greatest advantage we have as a species is our ability to collectively learn. And if I know something, why wouldn't I just teach it to you?
Right.
Why would I make you discover how to build fire when I already know how to make it? Right. It's the advantage we have over the animals. It's the greatest species advantage we have is the ability to collectively learn. And the Department of Education really wants you to discover how to make fire rather than somebody teach you how to make fire. And I didn't really care for that. So I moved from that into teaching adults. And I applied for a position at Tesla Motors. They were fortunate they took a chance on me, which was really fun in the interview process because I had no background in manufacturing. I worked at the car plant where they built the cars.
Okay.
And I had no background in manufacturing. And so when I got to the interview, it was really good because I would contextualize things because the big thing in manufacturing is something they call lean manufacturing, how to eliminate waste, how to take seconds out of a process, because every second you save in a process, when you extrapolate that out over a million cars, turns into $10 million, per second you can take out of that process. So they said, "Well, how you don't have any background in manufacturing?" And I would tell them about a tank fight. Seconds are lives in a tank fight. You got two tanks shooting at each other with 100+ millimeter cannons. Every second that you can trim off of your engagement time, if you can trim more seconds off of your time than they can trim off of theirs, you win. They lose.
Right.
And that's you're talking dollars. I'm talking lives and minds. So we took it very seriously. And all the things I learned in the military very well translated into lean manufacturing. They were the exact same concepts. We just didn't call them that. and they have efficiency management systems in the factory. There's one that's it's pretty much universal called 5S. Sort, set and order, shine, standardize, sustain. That's everything you do in the military is exactly done in that process.
Translates perfectly.
It translates perfectly. And so I found a home in Tesla Motors, and I really absolutely love teaching adults a lot more than teaching for the Department of Education. Let me just keep it in a positive. I love working for Tesla Motors more so than the other version.
Sure, yeah, I get it. That's really cool. I mean, working for Tesla is probably something that you never imagined, this tech car company, right?
It is a very fun factory. It's because it's very similar to the military. They really believe in pushing responsibility to very low levels, which is really great. That's very, very similar to the military.
Very empowering.
They believe in positive mental attitude, that everything is a matter of getting the best out of people. And they definitely believe in purposes higher than yourself, believing in things higher than yourself. Like in the factory, they would have all hands meetings, very similar to the military. We would get everybody together, and he would talk about why we're doing this. Like whatever initiative we were doing, he would talk about how it pertained to making the world a better place. Ideologically, I might disagree with some of that stuff, but I certainly agree with the premise that you get everybody believing there's some bigger purpose to what you're doing, and you try a little bit harder. You do a little bit better job. You form together in a tighter team. You unify, and so it was a great home. I loved every minute I worked in that factory.
That's cool. So you were up in the Bay Area doing that, right?
I did that in the Bay Area for a few years. I'm getting a little long in the tooth these days, so the 70-hour work weeks were getting a little rough. And so there was a point where my wife and I, we had a talk, and we said, at some point, let's cut bait and go back to San Diego. So we set a goal. In this case, it was a certain, that's got a little more private, private. But we'd set a financial benchmark of sorts.
Get back here.
And then when we reached that benchmark, we pulled chocks, and it was really fun because the work for my team at that time, I was working in a place called Chassis 2 and Chassis 3, which is where they put the battery onto the car and put the tires on it and do a few other, put the front end on it.
Okay.
And I was supervising a team of about 50 people, 50 associates. And when I gave my notice, they were just the greatest. They were just the greatest team ever. And they gave me just the best send off. I'll never forget it. It was I had like a few days left, and they told me it was their lunchtime, and they created some ruse like why I needed to go somewhere. And when I went there, they'd had a cake and all this stuff. And this is really just the nicest send off anybody could give you.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
that's really great. I mean, it's just great to be with great people, and and clearly they had a lot of admiration for you too. So
well, it was mutual. Yeah. They were just it was like a. when we'd start shift, we have a pre-shift meeting, and I'd bring it. It was like a football huddle, and I'd holler and they'd yell back, and we'd get all this motivation fired up to go out and build cars, But it was fun. It was a lot of fun.
That's cool, man. We get to tap into some of that drill instructor time there a little bit and get your voice back. That's really fun. So down in San Diego now, and just living the dream down here, right? We were talking about Southern California a little bit and how we love San Diego and stuff.
Oh, this is an amazing community. I love San Diego. We live in South Bay. We live down in a place called Chula Vista, which your cameraman went to high school with one of my sons. And so South Bay, San Diego is just a fantastic community. Great people live there. Great weather. Call it the weather tax here. I'm sure you deal with that quite a bit.
Absolutely. Yeah, we pay the weather tax.
And we were very blessed when we were looking for a home. That was when the housing crash of 2008, I believe, that's when we bought, was in 2008. And Chula Vista, the community we live in, was one of those very hard hit by the crash, the housing crash. Yeah. So on the block we bought on, 3 out of every 4 houses were bank owned. It was terrible how badly it had crashed there. But as with everything, if you're in the right place, right time, and you're willing to make a go of the right thing, we end up buying into a house that we never would have been able to afford under normal circumstances, and so did all our neighbors. So all our neighbors are very similar to us. They're all people who very much love the homes they're in because they never would have got them under any other circumstance.
Right.
And so there's a lot of pride of ownership in our community. We're all people who very much look out for each other.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Did you use your VA loan to buy
I
the
did.
house?
I used my VA loan.
Yeah. Awesome.
And I can see why people would really trust you because that was very important for us too. Because my family, we lived in base housing our whole lives. So when we first bought it, because it was bank owned, there was a lot of little wrench turning had to happen on
Yeah,
there.
there's a lot. Yeah.
And the water heater went out like early on, and I had another appointment later that day, and I told him, I said, no, I gotta change my water heater out. He's like, well, that's an hour project. I said, well, for you, it's an hour project. I've been in base housing my whole life. For me, I'm going to learn this whole thing.
Houses, yeah.
I have to learn how to do this. So it's been a lot of fun learning all these things that I had never learned, like through the first, for a man of my age, I should have known a lot more about a house than I did. But living in base housing, you don't touch nothing on a house. You just clean it and maintain the lawn. You don't. When something breaks, you call the base. They don't want you ripping out drywall and stuff like that in a base house.
Right.
So it was a lot of fun learning all that stuff. And back to what I started with that was we were in our mid 40s and buying our first home. And especially following a housing crash with the predator loans, that being like a big thing, we had to find somebody we trusted. And so we found this. He was a retired Marine officer, and he worked in the industry. He was a realtor, but we had to find somebody we trust, somebody from the family,
Right.
somebody we knew who knew us, understood what our questions were going to be. And so I can see why people would turn to you. That somebody from the family is somebody you can trust, because the contracts you have to know what you're looking at to decipher them.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people, we call it commission breath. There's a lot of people in the industry that just have commission breath, right? And they just see dollar signs, and so it's like I predicate my business on just really serving our military people.
Awesome.
And just helping, right? Because
Well
I just treat them how I would want to be treated. Like when they ask me questions, I explain it to them the way that I would want to hear it, right? And I take the sales out of it because it doesn't do me any good to force someone to buy a house or get financing, right? If it ends up being a bad decision for them, because it's just going to come tenfold back to me, right? So may as well just treat them right, do it right the first time, and sometimes that means no, you shouldn't, right? But that advice doesn't come from everyone that's in this commission-only world because they got that commission breath, right?
I think that'll return tenfold on you. I mean, an honest handshake and an honest eye-to-eye transaction, business transaction, that's lasting. It's never forgotten. And I know those individuals I talked about, I'll trust them for the rest of my life. Whatever it is they do, whatever other businesses they have, and I'll send my friends their way, because that's the sort of business that American business should be in. Is honest
Agreed.
people, integrity, and that's what separates veterans from. Well, I won't say separates, but it's very important in our world.
Yeah, I think it's common, right? It's common in our world.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, it makes it.
When I was a young
that trust
man,
factor a little easier to attain.
when I was a young NCO, when I was a corporal, this first sergeant Carroll, I sure hope he'd watch his podcast because he sure
Send it to him.
He hated this side of me when I was a young, and as I grew older in leadership positions, I understand why he hated me. Was that I hadn't quite learned a lot of the character lessons that I would ultimately learn from him, a lot of them from him. And when he would have these NCO meetings, he used to ask us all the time, what was the most important leadership trait? And I would say things like courage. I would say knowledge. If you don't know what the heck you're doing, who the heck's going to follow you? If you don't have the courage to do, and all this stuff. And he would say, no, integrity. He would always say integrity. And I was like, what the heck's he talking about? And as I grew older in life, I grew to realize that's absolutely right. If people can't trust the words coming out your mouth, there's nothing else that'll matter. And when I went into education, if you don't base things on fact, if you don't base things on things that are true, you're building whatever knowledge you build, you're building on a house of sand, on a house of cards. It's just nothing. Yeah. Integrity's got to be the foundation of everything. Yeah, I'm with you on that. And First Sergeant Carroll, he beat that lesson into me pretty harshly.
Man, it's an important life lesson. And what's cool too is just these different mentors and teachers and things we had in our lives
Sure.
that left such a big impact, right? And as you're mentioning teachers' names, I'm thinking of teachers' names like from high school and stuff like that made impacts on me, and my drill instructor and stuff like that. So yeah, it's cool. It's cool to be able to carry these life lessons and stuff.
I'm gonna give one more shout out to another teacher of mine, Miss McDonald. She was an English teacher of mine in high school, and we had two McDonalds. The husband was my shop teacher, and the wife was my English teacher. And Miss McDonald, we would debate. We'd have debates in this class, and one of the things she did was she would always find out, like she'd say, like let's say we'd debate like topics, whatever they were. Like let's say we were debating pro-life, pro-choice. She'd say, "What is it you believe?" And whatever it was you believed, she would make you be on the side of the opposite side. You would have to, if you were pro-choice, you would have to be on the pro-life team. And if you were on the pro-life side, you'd have to be on the pro-choice team. I just give that as an example. I can't remember what the specific topics were we would debate.
Yeah.
But whatever it was, you would always have to debate the opposite side of what your core belief was. That helped me with everything else I would ever do in life, and especially of being a Marine. People talk about critical thinking, the ability to be able to look at something from somebody else's perspective. Every town I went into in the combat zone, every movement to contact I did, I would always look at in terms of if I was that guy, how would I kill me? What would I do? Yeah. Or if I was that citizen on the street, how would I see me? Or when I was a teacher, if I was that student sitting in that chair, what would be important to me? How would I perceive this instruction happening right here? If I was turning that wrench in that factory, what would be important to me? And the ability to look at that from the other guy's perspective. Miss McDonald making us debate those other sides, life change. It made me a better Marine, made me a better everything I did in life.
Yeah, that's huge. Great life lessons. Well, Nick, we got to wrap it up today, and this has been awesome, man. I really enjoyed talking with you.
I had a lot of fun.
Learning about you. Yeah, it's a lot of fun, and thank you so much for coming by, being on the Armed and Ready podcast, and we'll check out next time.
Yeah, thanks for having me aboard.
You bet. Thank you so much for listening today to the Armed and Ready podcast. If you have any questions about anything we talked about today, we'd be happy to get to you. You could reach me at valoanguy.us. Have a good one.